This video is brought to you by my patrons. More on them in a bit. You ever start a project and then get distracted, move on to something else, and then it just ends up sitting on a shelf forever, staring at you, mocking you? Today I'm going to show you how to make a monster eye, specifically the trash compactor monster from Star Wars. For this build, I use craft foam, floor mat foam, clay foam, a pool noodle, also foam, coffee foam, a garbage bag, tape, green paint, hot glue, a transparent plastic dome, epoxy resin, a printer, sanding tools, safety gear, scissors, razor pens, and a box cutter. I started by taking a pool noodle and cutting it in half so that it would be a more manageable size to work with. This is designed to be puppeteered, so it really barely needs to be a couple of feet long, really. Then I added an L-bend 2/3 of the way up. I did this by cutting a notch with a handsaw. This is actually overkill. You can cut through pool noodles with a bread knife, really, but I'm trying not to mix the shop equipment with kitchen utensils, just for sanitary reasons. They're never a good mix. I used the same technique to add a less significant bend below that one. Then I heated up the notches with my heat gun. This will melt the foam, making it tacky, so that when folded together, they'll stick and form a right angle. This technique doesn't always work super well, and it can be dangerous, so I used hot glue on the lower notch. Pool noodle foam is a really good insulator, so to keep it from coming apart as the glue cooled, I skewered a few toothpicks in there and taped it up. I did the same up top, and then I heavily reinforced it with tape. This will be the core of the eyeball stock. I thought it still looked just a little bit too rigid, so I added a third notch in the shorter end of the L-bend. All of this is just to hold up the eyeball, which is the most complicated part of the build and will take several days to be ready. So let's get started on that right now. I found a plastic dome, which was previously packaging material, and polished it up. Only one half is going to be used for the eye by the end of this project, but that eye is going to have a dry time of at least a day, probably 3, and the paint has dry time. So once that was in there, I took the other half to the resin station. Then I photoshopped an iris from somebody's eye, doesn't matter who, to be more vibrant and rainbow colored. I printed it out, I cut it out, measured its circumference, and traced it onto the plastic dome with dry erase. Then I mixed up some resin and poured it into the dome. After that, I carefully placed the image into the pool of resin in the dome, making sure that it was completely soaked through but didn't sink. Also, you want to try not to trap any air bubbles. Notice I'm wearing a mask and gloves. Well, I don't know if you can see from this angle, but I am wearing a mask because this stuff is not great to breathe. It's very poison. Everything is poison. And now we wait. Resin takes a while to solidify, anywhere from 30 minutes to 3 days, depending on the brand that you buy. Okay, now that it's fully solid, I need to create the whites of the eye, so I painted that with white acrylic. Don't use spray paint, it'll flake. When it dried, I did some spot touch-up in red so that the really thin white brush strokes would show through and look like teeny tiny red veins. After that, I did another coat of white. The effect doesn't show up perfectly on camera unless, it's an extreme close-up, but it is there, so yeah, I thought it was a fun experiment. Then, I did a black dot in the center just to add depth to the pupil. I trimmed the edge of the plastic and glued the eye to the end of the noodle using hot glue. Now, hot glue can get hot enough to melt both the eyeball plastic and the pool noodle, so I had to be careful about that by using the glue gun shortly after it was turned on, rather than letting it sit and heat up for too long, because then it would be too hot. Now that that's cooled down, I'm going to wrap some duct tape around there just to reinforce it. I'm trying to be careful not to cover up too much of the white, because that kind of defeats the purpose. You could do the whole thing in duct tape, but then would only work in low light. Once the eye was secured to the stalk, I wrapped it up in a trash bag to create wrinkles. I taped it on with black duct tape, which I used to cover up the rough attachment point where the eye meets the stalk. I chose to do the foam clay application in 2 stages because it doesn't stick extremely well to the trash bag, and it's going to shrink a little bit as it dries. So this first clay application is actually going to be the surface on which the details will go. I set that aside for a few days to dry. 2 months later. Now that it's dry, I can move on to round 2 of foam clay. I built up details. I made varicose veins out of foam clay by rolling it into pasta and applying it. I try to spread them out from the eye. I'm also attempting to create a bit of an eyelid by making increasingly narrower strands of foam clay and layering them over the eyeball in descending order of thickness. I added larger strands on top of the stalk, running back from the eye and off to the sides, just to match the look of the trash compactor monster. Then I set that aside again to dry for another 2 or 3 days. 3 months later. By this time the foam clay was dry, so I painted it with gloss black acrylic house paint. It's important to get the paint in every single little nook and cranny so that there's absolutely no gray showing. The black is going to get the foam clay to match the garbage bag color, and all black is a valid look for just a generic monster eye, but for me this is far from a finished paint scheme. See, normally I would do 3 layers of gloss black just to ensure that the outermost coat was shiny. I find that that's not really necessary for foam clay. It's a little less absorbent. Once it dries, it sort of creates its own hardened shell a little bit. At least it seems to anyway. And it doesn't need as many layers as regular EVA foam floor mats do. I still have to do 2 layers, however, just because of the nature of this particular paint job. I really want all these details to show up, and that's only going to happen if it gets a base coat of black. As I wrap this up, I noticed that I forgot to do anything to protect the eyeball from the black paint. So before getting into all those little tiny wrinkles that are close to the whites of the eye, I masked off the eyeball with blue painter's tape so that I wouldn't get any drips onto the eye. Okay, now I can finish the base coat. You also usually want to start off with it masked instead of stopping mid paint job, because it's really easy to be turning this around and working on something on one side and not realizing that you're brushing up against it on the other side and suddenly you messed up your paint job. Just precautions, you know? And there we go, finished with the base coat of black. All right, now I gotta run out and pick up some green paint. In the meantime, I'm gonna let that paint dry. 4 months later. Now I'm gonna add a top coat of green. I was deliberately sloppy and less than thorough with this process so that the green wouldn't get in all the crevices like the black did, and those black areas would show through, creating depth. It's helpful to unload most of the paint from your brush before doing a top coat like this, just to prevent large quantities of paint from seeping into those crevices and covering up the black. See, this is kind of dry brushing. It's basically a dry brushing technique, which I don't get to showcase often, but I think I did this in the asteroid tutorial from way back when. Now this isn't quite exactly like the movie monster. They actually changed the Dianoga when they remastered the movie, so this is more accurate to the 1977 version than the remastered one. After the green coat, I set it aside to dry. 5,000 years later. What is that accent? Definitely not Jacques Cousteau. It's like I'm mixing Jacques Cousteau and Arnold Schwarzenegger. Note to self, work on accents. Now that it's dry, I took it into the studio to get the beauty shots. Looks like my standard studio setup isn't gonna work with this build. Yeah, I clearly didn't think this through. See, I just built an R2D2 with, he's blue, so the green screen is still set up for that. The ironic thing is I ended up changing the colors to red after the fact for the R4 sketch. Not a lot of people saw, but I had fun with it. Hang on. There we go. All right, let's throw some effects on that, and voila! It's disgusting. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this build, then you can subscribe and hit the bell icon to see future prop builds. Once again, I'd like to thank my patrons. Those are the names scrolling by. Their support is what makes these videos possible. And this particular video should have been finished in a week, but instead it sat in the queue for a year, staring at me, mocking me, staring into my soul. And that's because I'm beholden to what the YouTube algorithm says is trending that week. And creature eyes are just never trending. Yet the algorithm doesn't like prop builds. It likes top 10 outrageous somethings you won't believe. I'm making videos for computers, guys. If you're a human and want to see videos by humans for humans, then why not consider joining the patrons? In addition to getting ad-free early uploads, you'll be taking the power back from the algorithm. Don't let Skynet win. I don't want to be living in an apocalypse. All right, thanks for watching. Happy crafting. See you later. This is totally real work that I'm really doing right now. This is how you make an EVA foam helmet. Just sort of stab it with a soldering iron over and over and over. That's how the foam do.